Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Young. I am a world history teacher in Boston, Massachusetts. So that is the green star right here is where I'm located. And even though I teach world history, I'm really passionate and interested in science because I think we're all scientists and we're all historians. And specifically, I'm really interested in the Arctic and permafrost and everything that's happening in the very far north. So where the pink stars are some of the areas of the Arctic I've been able to travel to, or that I work with teams of scientists who are traveling there to discover and learn new things. So one is up in Alaska, which is this pink star. One is actually off the map. It's so far north, it's not on the map, and that's in northern Greenland. And then the other area is Svalbard, which is a part of Norway and a little bit a part of Russia as well. And then we see you guys the other green star all the way over in Tamil Nadu, southern India. So we're talking about the whole globe today. And I want to show you one more map. So when we talk about the Arctic, actually, it's more helpful to rethink our map and actually look at the world from the north. It's a very different orientation than we're used to looking at the world from, but looking at it on top. So this is the Arctic, and the Arctic is mostly land of many different countries surrounding the Arctic Ocean. And we hope that the Arctic Ocean is predominantly an ice sheet. It should not be very easily crossable, but that is changing, and that's something we'll talk about today. So this is a little bit of a map to give you an idea of where we're going to be talking about. So I would love to hear your questions. Who's got question number one?
Yes.
You one question, ma'am. How does global warming affect the Arctic region?
Yeah, thank you very much. That is an amazing question. So when we talk about how global warming affects the Arctic region, I'm going to show you this video. There's lots of ways, but the most important thing, or the thing we want to most focus on. So this is a video I talked about how the Arctic is mostly land surrounded by ocean. And we want there to be an ice sheet in that ocean. And what we see in white here is the ice sheet melting over time. As we see, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is one of the main ways that global warming impacts the Arctic, is with the increasing temperatures, that large Arctic ice sheet starts to melt over time. And that impacts it's good for economic reasons because boats can get through there and there's more shipping and people can make more money. But at the other time, it has some other impacts that we'll talk a little bit more. But the biggest thing that's happening in the Arctic is the temperatures rising, and this really important ice sheet is melting. As you can see, look how, I'll speed it up a little. It's getting smaller and smaller. So here's the change over the last 30, 40 years. So question number two.
Yes.
I would like to ask a question, ma'am. What are the world's rarest species?
Okay. So there's lots of rare species in the world, and I don't know a lot about, the whole world, but the vaquita is one. It's a lot of the rare species are in the ocean, but I can tell you one of my favorite rare species in the Arctic is the narwhal. These are we often think these are imaginary animals, but they are real. So this is a rare animal that we see in the Arctic that is a whale. That tusk you see coming off is actually a tooth, and it's only present on the male whales. But there are actually a fair number. The narwhal is not one of the most endangered animals in the Arctic, but it is one of the hardest to see. It's it lives mostly underneath the ice, and sometimes we can see them when they're migrating and they're coming up for air, and when they're feeding, but they're very difficult to spot. But they look like, sometimes they're called the unicorns of the sea.
I'd like to ask you a question, ma'am.
Yes, please.
How is climate change affecting animals?
Oh, okay. So some of the ways that climate change is impacting the animals in the Arctic, I'll show you a couple of Arctic animals in case you're not familiar with some of the animals that are living there, but a lot of ways that the animals are being impacted is very similar. So one of the animals in the Arctic is the walrus. They are very, very big. They've got a lot of blubber on them to keep them warm. And an interesting fact is they smell really, really, really bad. So if you ever even if you're not near a walrus, you will smell a walrus before you see it. But the walrus live on the ice, and we know that they live on the ice so that they can rest, but also so that they can hunt. And as that ice sheet is melting, they have less and less places to live, and they have to migrate onto land. So the decreasing habitat decreases their food and decreases the number of smelly walruses we have in the Arctic. And even though they smell, they're still very important. Another animal, this one is really, really big, a blue whale. So we can only see a little bit of this blue whale in this picture, and you see his blowhole, but that blowhole is like bigger than my head. So we can imagine how big this whale is underneath the ocean. And as the ice sheet melts, the ocean gets warmer, and the blue whale has to change where it's living. So it has to migrate, or it has to move to other areas looking for food, but it'll go down to warmer areas. And then when it does, it finds the food that it wants is not there. And it also has to compete with all the other animals who are already living there. So the walrus or the blue whale moves further south, but again, can't find its food. Now, everyone's favorite animal normally in the Arctic, and the one that we see the most, is the polar bear. So this is an image of a polar bear I saw. The polar bear, like the walruses, live on the ice, but they don't smell as bad. And the polar bears also use the ice to hunt. And when they can't use the ice to hunt, they have to go onto land, and then they compete with people for food. So we want to keep the ice so the polar bear can hunt the animals and still enjoy their habitat. But we see lots of images from National Geographic in different areas, polar bears coming into people's houses and coming into towns and cities, and also polar bears starving because they don't have any food. So thank you for the good one. So one thing I want to talk about, so permafrost is a very interesting English vocabulary word. But so just to kind of reiterate, what is permafrost? It's something I did not know a lot about because the area I live in the United States does not have any permafrost. There's no permafrost in India. So this is a really interesting geographic feature that is very different to most people in the world. So permafrost is soil and land below the surface that has been frozen for 2 or more years in a row. Most permafrost, or a lot of most of our permafrost has been frozen for over like 10,000 years. It's really, really, really old. So you see an image here of me on the right going into a tunnel to look at some of this very old permafrost. Sometimes the permafrost is water that's frozen, and sometimes it's soil that's frozen, but it's area beneath that normal active layer where if you guys dig a hole somewhere, you're just digging regular soil. It goes beneath that, and it's been frozen for 2 or more years. We see permafrost mostly in the Arctic. There's a little bit in Antarctica and the South Pole, but a lot of permafrost in Russia, a lot of permafrost in Alaska. It's everywhere kind of up in the northern Arctic. It's important because it stores carbon, but it also creates the habitats that all these animals live in. So we need permafrost to keep the ground frozen because all of these animals have developed specific adaptations. They only know how to live in an area where, so some animals live on the ice, but some of the animals and people live on the land, and they have adapted and developed lifestyles that depend on the permafrost. So if the permafrost melts, it changes the habitat completely, and they can't live there anymore, but they also can't live anywhere else in the world. So the animals and people will disappear. So very good question about permafrost.
Next, Geta Sahiti. Next, Sindhuja.
Yes, sir. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
This is Sindhuja, a sixth grader. I would like to ask a question, ma'am.
Yes, please.
What is life What is life like in Arctic?
Yeah, what's life like in the Arctic? So it's very different from India and it's very different from where I live as well. So a couple things to know about life in the Arctic. So we have lots of animals that live in the Arctic, but we also have lots of people who live in the Arctic, and the people who are living in the Arctic have lived there for a really, really long time. So this is a map of some of the indigenous or kind of first inhabitants of the Arctic. And you see there's lots of different names of different groups of people living all around that land in the far north. And while they are not very densely populated, so there's not many people, there's lots of different cultures and different peoples who have been living there for a very long time. So one incorrect assumption we sometimes make about the Arctic is that only animals live there. People live there as well, and people have been living there, the animals were there first, but then the indigenous people were there, and then kind of modern day countries came after that. So if you were to move there, one thing you need to be prepared for is the bugs.
They're like bites.
So these are bugs. These are mosquitoes. They are very, very large. And in the summer season, these are the bugs that you would have to be prepared to live with. They bite and they are not pleasant to be around. And I apologize for some of the audio on the video. I did not realize that it had audio. I've only ever visually seen this. So I apologize for the language. There's some vocabulary you should not repeat. Another thing to be prepared for life in the Arctic, it is really cold. So you see all that white stuff, that's the snow. So you will have to put every single piece of clothing you have on. You'll have to cover your whole body. You will also need sunglasses because the white snow reflects the sunlight, and you can become snow blind. Because the light is so bright. So you want to wear sunglasses when you're Arctic. So you're worried about the light, but you're also worried about the cold. So that's a little difficult to imagine. And you see these special yellow tents. These are tents that have special insulation. So people who live in the Arctic don't live in these tents. These tents are for scientists who are going out to really remote areas of the ice sheet and only living there temporarily. People who are living in the Arctic have permanent dwellings that have a lot of different adaptations that help them live in the cold area. Here's what it looks like during the summer, which is still very, very cold. It gets muddy and it's not a ton of fun, but it helps us stay warm in the Arctic. So you got to be prepared for the bugs and the cold if you're going to live in the Arctic. Thank you very much for the question. Does someone else have a question?
Yes, Sindhu, go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Sir. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
This is Sindhu, a sixth grader. I would like to ask you a question, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Why are so many species are disappearing every year?
Yeah. Yeah, so why are so many species disappearing? So one thing to know, we definitely see lots of species disappearing in the Arctic, but also all across the world. Species are disappearing in the Arctic at a faster rate than other areas because the habitat is so endangered by global warming. So as the temperature gets warmer, the habitat gets destroyed, the permafrost melts, and the whole habitat changes, their food changes, and the animals die. But I do want to point out, for the species who don't disappear, some of the species adapt and they move. And this is kind of a picture. This is extreme. We're probably never going to see polar bears living in Australia or hippos living in Europe, but we do see species moving, like where they used to live in the far north, and they'll move south. And the range of where species are living is changing. So some species are disappearing because of climate change. They lose their food, they lose their habitat, but we also see some species are able to adapt and move further south or move further north and adapt to a new way of life. So we may see some new animals and some new plants. Most likely in Boston and India, we're seeing this in new plants and new birds showing up in different areas, or certain plants disappearing and going somewhere else, or certain birds disappearing and going somewhere else. also with insects. Thank you for that question.
Okay. Lohita, it's your turn. Lohita.
Ma'am, this is Lohita Girija. I'm studying class 9. Would you allow me to ask a question?
Yes, please.
Would you mind telling us about species adaptations?
Yeah, let's talk about some species adaptations. So one thing we're curious about is some specific things that species have developed in order to be able to survive in the Arctic. So right now I'm going to talk to you about a mountain avens. This is a flower, and it's a very, very small flower, but it is relatively common in the Arctic. And it has developed some cool skills that helps it survive. These are all around, how to stay warm and how to get food. So one thing the mountain avens does is it changes its shape of its leaves. So it's more like a curve. It's kind of like a satellite dish. If any of you guys have satellite dishes to help you get internet or cell phone coverage, or maybe you have some at your school, but it's like a curved dish. And what that's going to allow is the mountain avens to reflect light into its center, and that will help it stay warmer. If it was flat, it wouldn't reflect. There's so little light and it's so cold, it wants to do as much as it can to stay as warm as it can. So it kind of does this thing, it curves its leaves so the light reflects inward. Another thing it does is, because the light is so limited in the Arctic, so during certain times of year, there's actually no light, but during certain times of the year, it's light all the time. But during parts of the year where there's limited light, this flower moves with the sun so that it can get the maximum amount of light all day long. And now it doesn't get up and walk away. That would be really interesting if we saw running around flowers in the Arctic, but we don't see that. But what we see is it's kind of got this satellite dish, and then it rotates and moves so it's taking in the most sun as possible. And because it's so warm, it helps it stay alive, but that also means that insects come to it. So it helps it stay alive, but then it helps insects stay alive. And then the insects act as pollinators, which help the flower survive. So these kind of combinations, they work together to help this little teeny flower survive in a very harsh climate. So another cool adaptation from an animal is the Arctic fox. So the Arctic fox is one of the animals that is fastest disappearing in the Arctic, even though it has tremendously good adaptations. First of all, it's got good clothes, so it's camouflaged. It changes its color depending upon the season, and this can be really confusing. So an Arctic fox looks kind of brown and dirty in the spring and summer, and then it's a bright white in the winter because of the snow. So these changes allow it to camouflage and hide from predators so it doesn't get eaten. The second adaptation that an Arctic fox has, which some of you guys may see some similar, you say, oh, I'm kind of like that too. Some of you guys may say, no, I only like specific foods. An Arctic fox will eat anything. Even think of the worst, grossest thing you would never, ever eat. The Arctic fox would eat it. It does not care. It will eat anything dead or alive. The most disgusting thing you can imagine, as long as it's not poisonous, the Arctic fox will eat it. It doesn't care. It has no taste buds. It just wants food. The other thing that's really interesting about an Arctic fox is we talked about species edge ranges changing, them going further south or further north. The Arctic fox can travel. So we have foxes that have they put tags on, and they've traveled, essentially from Norway to Canada over the ice. They can travel really, really far over the ice and kind of survive. So these are two animals that have really interesting adaptations in the Arctic that allow them to survive. So thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you. Meghana, it's your turn.
Yes. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
My name is Meghna. I am studying 9th grade. Can I ask one question, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Why do we need to protect the Arctic?
Yeah, great question, because it's so far away. Why should we care? It's not here. It's so far away from Boston. It's so far away from India. Why should we care about the Arctic? Well, if the Arctic does not survive, we do not survive. Our fates are linked together. There is no world without the Arctic. And the easiest way to think about this is the Arctic is the world's air conditioner. It keeps the world inhabitable or at a temperature that humans can live at. And if our world's air conditioner breaks down for a long period of time, the world will get too warm and our species will have to adapt. And we really don't know what will happen. But the reason the Arctic is the world's air conditioner is that ice sheet, again, that I talked about is white. So sun comes down and then it reflects off the ice sheet because it's white and it goes back up. And this allows our Earth to stay cooler. But as the world gets warmer and the ice sheet gets smaller, what happens is the sun comes down and it goes into the ocean and it gets absorbed. And that increases the temperature, and that also then increases the melting of the ice. So we need to protect the Arctic because we need the global warming to stay low. There's a big meeting in Egypt right now where countries from across the world are getting together to discuss things that can be done to try and stop the rise in global temperature. And one of the major players is the United States, so where I'm from. And the United States is one of the biggest problems, but also one of the countries that's doing the least. So this is an interesting political challenge that the people with the most power and who are causing the most problems are doing the least, unfortunately, to help this. But we have to protect the Arctic because it'll be very challenging for us. So great question. The Arctic matters a lot, even if you never go there.
So students, any more questions? Does anyone have questions? So it looks like,
Sir,
yes, please. Yes, go
Hi,
ahead.
ma'am. This is Nagalakshmi. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Could you please tell us about northernmost terrestrial life Earth?
Yes. So one group of scientists that I'm working with wants to discover, we actually don't know this. This is an unanswered question in the world. Science does not know. What is the northernmost life on Earth? So when we talk about terrestrial life, we're talking about life on land. So not life in the sea or life in the sky or in the air, but what is the northernmost plant or animal that exists in the world? And part of the reason why we don't know the answer to this is because we actually don't even know where the northernmost land is on Earth because of the ice. And because it's such an extreme faraway place, it's really difficult. Scientists keep going and trying to discover what the northernmost land is, but they keep coming up with different answers. So last summer, a team of scientists from Denmark went back up, and all of these islands that are pictured in this image, they actually found out aren't real. They've all disappeared. They were just kind of piles of glacial rocks. So we are never kind of sure where the northernmost land is. So we need to know where the northernmost land is to know where the northernmost life is. But it's definitely in Greenland. It's definitely in the far north of Greenland, but we just don't know how far off the shore, where the furthest north island is. So with global warming, we will find out, but that is not something we necessarily want the answer to. But the team of scientists I'm working with will head up there this summer, and they're going to go look at the islands that we do know about. And these are some of the things that they think might be the northernmost life. Most likely is it's a small plant. We hope it's a small flower because we think that would be a very beautiful picture. But it could be a caribou. It's probably not a polar bear or an Arctic fox, but any sort of poppy or sassafras or cotton grass or fern is most likely the northernmost life. And it's because they can be so small, they can adapt to a really, really harsh environment using a lot of those adaptations we talked about earlier. So this is what we think will be the northernmost life, but we won't know until this summer. But I will definitely email you guys and let you know what the team discovers. So if you have a guess, do you think which planet it'll be or which animal it might be? Kind of think about that, and I can tell you in like 9 months what the answer is.
Yes, Kim, I have a question actually. You have been to Arctic and you have participated in many research programs. as far as the Arctic is concerned. And so what passionated you visiting the Arctic region?
So I wanted to go to a place that was so the most different from where I lived. I was really, really curious to see a place that I had never seen before and that was so different from, where I lived. I wanted to like just feel really uncomfortable and for things to feel really different. But then when I got there, I fell in love with the ice. The ice is so beautiful. That is what kept me kind of interested in it. And then the final thing is once I found out how important it was, I thought the Arctic was just important because it was beautiful. And, why wouldn't we want to protect land and animals that are so beautiful? But when I understood how important my fate is with the Arctic's fate, that made me really passionate and interested in learning more about it.
Yeah. So one more question, actually, when compared to the Arctic region with the Antarctic region, I think these two regions, as we have been following the news updates, the ice cap, the ice cover over these two regions are past melting. So do you think that the same phenomena happening from northern, that means Arctic region and Antarctic region, do you think that many islands are going to disappear in a few years from now?
Not, I think in the next 50 to 60 years. I think there's still a little, because the ice is still so thick, it will take some time. But the same thing that's happening, what's happening in the Arctic is also happening in the Antarctic. The difference is just the Antarctic is land with ice on top of it versus water with ice on top of it. It will be interesting to see, but both are important to protect. And we definitely need to keep watching the news and pressure our politicians to change policies. We can do individual things, but the biggest thing we can do is vote and encourage the people who represent us to change policies to try and keep the earth cool.
So I have one more question, actually. Is there any change to bring about a few reformations in the education system all over the world to include the Arctic and Antarctic? I mean, there is a grave need to protect these two regions. So don't you think that these two aspects should be included in every country's curriculum in order to bring awareness among the students, especially the students, because they are going to be the future leaders of their
Yes.
countries?
So I think that a lot of times in the curriculum, we talk about our own local area and what we can do here, but sometimes we forget how our fate is all interconnected. So if, why ever you're doing it is a good reason, but yes, I think it helps to know that when you're voting or you're doing something differently, or you're trying to do something differently, knowing that it'll not only help you, but it will help somebody else, gives you extra motivation or extra reasons to do it. I know I never learned about the Arctic growing up. It was not a part of my school or my curriculum because it's so far away. We just think we don't need to know about it, but better understanding the way in which what we do here impacts there and what happens there impacts us just gives us more inspiration. If you're not going to do it for yourself, you want to do it for at least for somebody else.
So the emissions, especially from the factories and the vehicles, in fact, in India is a huge country. And so many people actually, they use the motor vehicles rather than going by bicycle. They don't prefer bicycle. So don't you think that the education, that awareness among the students in order to reduce the emissions levels so that we can protect the environment and so that we can even protect the Arctic and Antarctic?
Yes. So I think it starts with, one thing you do is your individual actions, what you do as an individual in terms of riding bikes or thinking about what you're purchasing. Is it reusable or is it a single use? Are you buying a bag of chips, you open it up, you eat it and you throw it away? So that starts individual actions, but then it's also in how you vote. But I also think it's in what you learn. So the hoping that you guys continue your education and you discover new technologies and new energies so that people have choices. Can you invent a better car that doesn't use fossil fuels? Can you invent a different way of sharing resources? Do we have to fight over resources, or could we all use less and share? Maybe you can come up with the new political system. So I really think, it's those individual actions and it's voting, but it's also your inventions. You guys have all of the new ideas. So continue to stay in school, continue to learn lots of languages, continue to learn science and history. You need to know it all so that then you can go to school and people will listen to you when you have a new idea about how to do things differently, that is maybe motivated by saving the world, and that also makes money. But you can do both. Your invention can make a lot of money and it can save the world. It doesn't have to just make a lot of money.
So we have 3 minutes time is left. So before we wind up this session, could you please give a final message to my students?
So my final message is to be curious, keep asking questions. It is not bad not to know the answer to anything. It's most important to ask a question and then someone will help you learn. So I'm really proud of all of you guys for coming up with great questions. I'm really proud of all of you guys for spending your late evening night learning and being curious. I know this is extra and more. You could be sleeping, but you're up learning about the Arctic and you're practicing asking questions. So you guys are all doing the hard work that matters. So I am very proud of you all the way from Boston. Keep asking questions and keep listening to your teachers.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, and we really enjoyed a lot because you showed each and every answer and in the form of a PowerPoint presentation, and that really had a great appeal to the students in terms of understanding the concept. So thank you so much, and thank you so much one more time, and we really enjoy your session, and we look forward to have one more in future.